All right, hello everybody. This is lesson 10. This is going to be our touching back on NPM because we talked a little bit about NPM in the end of the last lesson, but then getting into Ember framework and really diving into Ember framework. So let's start with just talking about Node, and we did cover this a little bit, but we're gonna reiterate and go over a few things here. So like I explained before, Node.js is basically a JavaScript engine to execute JavaScript runtime during like in a console in a console setting. So if you are trying to test out your Node code on a Windows machine or a Mac machine, whatever you want to use, you want to basically go to nodejs.org, and by default it should detect what operating system you're using. Here it's saying download for Windows 64, and I could go ahead and download either the LTS version, I'll explain what this means in a second, or you can download the current version. So the LTS version, and here it says recommended for most users. LTS stands for last, oh crap, I forgot what it stands for. Let's look it up. LTS stands for long-term support. There you go. That's what it means. Long-term support. And basically what this means is, even though this is an older version, you can see it's like significantly old compared to the current version, right? Because this is two full versions ahead where we're at right now. But the long I already forgot what it means, but the LTS long-term support. There you go. It basically means that they will continue to make updates and fix any issues and release security patches for this version. Now, as we kind of discussed a little bit on the previous lesson, any library that's managed by anything, Node.js technically being one of them, they are always making changes and they're always making improvements. There's always updates, etc. So from version 15 or version 16, there may be some changes that would break something that you built on version 14, right? So one of the main reasons why, other than the security patches, another big reason for sticking to an LTS version is that you know that anything that you're installing that's fairly new is going to be supported by that LTS version. So the recommendation, unless you're so if you're building a brand new app from scratch, I'd recommend going current instead of LTS. But if you are, or it also depends on the size of your project. If you are going to be developing something brand new, current makes sense because you have nothing yet, so you may as well start like working with the most recent updates that has been made to Node. One thing to note though is there could be bugs in the most recent version, things that people haven't ran into yet. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You could run into issues. But if you're working with a framework that runs on a Node, for instance, in this case, we're going to be doing a lot of work with Ember, I would recommend getting the LTS version instead. Now, my setup is a little different. I have a server that I run from, and one second, let's check this message here. Camera isn't on Twitch. Okay, thank you. I forgot to switch templates there. So I've been kind of, basically I haven't really done anything besides just point left and right to these two versions here as I've been kind of discussing it. But the LTS version would be recommended if you're running Ember, because Ember CLI is something on its own that's managed and maintained by the Ember team, and obviously they're not going to be releasing updates that quickly where it would be completely up to date with version 16. So if you want to ensure that everything's going to work, you're going to work with a version 14, whatever the LTS version is at the time. And in this case, it's 14.17.1. Sometimes if you're working with an older Ember project, you might actually have to use an even older version, and that's when you can use something like Npm, which is the Node version manager. But we're not going to get into that today or probably ever in these lessons because it's really not important. That's really more if you're working with a team and you're like getting hired to work on an Ember application or Angular, whatever framework that's really old and it's running in an older Node version, then you may have to use something like NVM to make sure that your versions are compatible. But not trying to start this lesson by confusing the hell out of everybody, but that is essentially the introduction to Node. Now, I was gonna get into the fact that my Node environment is set up on my server on my Linux machine. So if you're installing Node on Windows, you would basically run your Node commands from your command prompt wherever your files are. If you're not familiar with like the basic command prompts, there are guides everywhere for that. We're not going to cover a whole lot of that into this lesson. If you're like following this video while doing stuff that we're going to be doing here on this lesson today, and you're doing it on a Windows machine, I would recommend using something like Git Bash instead to run your commands, even if you're on Windows, because if you're running Git Bash, then the commands that you run are going to basically be the same syntax in your console as I will be writing them on my Linux console, which would be the same for a Mac console. So to kind of keep this in a way that everybody can work off of this, again, if you're on Windows, download Git Bash. I'll show you how to do this. You could just Google Git Bash. It'll take you to this main gitscm.com. You go to downloads, click on Windows, and then just install this. It'll come with both the normal Git and Git Bash, and then you can just make sure that you install your Git Bash, install it with the default options, and then you'll have Git Bash installed on your machine, which is this right here, and then you can open Git Bash. Now let's just say you want your project to run on a folder, right? So I'm gonna this is where all my work stuff is, in my work files folder. So if I go to Dynamic repositories, this is like all the projects that I work on are in. So say I want to make a new project, right? I'm gonna just right click here, make a new folder. I'm just gonna call it like test new Ember, and I'm going to right click on this and I'm gonna click on Git Bash here. So this is going to open my Git Bash console, and it's already going to be on that directory for the folder that I'm going to be working on. So if I have npm installed, if you do node-v, you'll see the Node version. Now in this case, I don't have Node installed on my Windows machine, so it's going to say command not found. But if you do have it installed and you installed it, you will see that there. Now, kind of let's go ahead and skip over to my server, which is where I will be showing you guys some of this stuff. So I'm just going to open that up. So if you did it on your folder, it'll be equivalent. Now within Linux, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same. I'm going to navigate over to where my work directory is. I'm going to go cd Ember, and I'm just going to make a new folder called test new Ember. Same thing that I did on Windows. So now I'm in that folder, and here I'm going to type node v, and you see that I do have my Node version come up right there. And my Node version is the LTS version that we're using here. So before I keep going here, Nora, do you have any questions so far about this?
No.
Okay, good. All
I'm
right,
gonna
so,
download everything after and like rewatch the video.
okay, no problem.
Like,
So this would be everybody else's setup on a Windows machine or on a Mac machine or on a Linux, whatever you're using. It would be similar to this, and you would navigate over to where you're going to create your projects or do whatever you want to do with Node. And if you type node-v, it doesn't actually do anything. It just outputs the version of Node that you're using. Now, Node automatically comes with an app as well called Npm. And Npm, if you do npm-v, you're going to get a whole other version. So Npm is technically a different tool that you're using, but Npm stands for Node Package Manager. I don't know if I can make the text bigger for this. Let me see something real quick. Let me just so it's easier for everybody to read what I'm doing, because we're going to spend a lot of time with this console open. So I'm going to load this. let me just save this as course lessons. I'm gonna save connection to my server as lessons, and I think, well, let me delete that real quick. I think I can change the appearance. If I can't find it quickly, I'm just not gonna do it. But I think there is a way to change. Yeah, there you go. Font console is 10 point. I'm gonna, just to make it easier for everybody to read, I'm gonna change that to 14.5.
Yeah, some of that looks like Chinese symbols. There we go. That's better.
Yeah, 16 point font. And then let me just make sure that I got the right session. Save.
It was all pixelated.
So for lessons, I just got to remember to use this one, and it'll open it up like that, which should be a lot easier for people to read. Okay, so you can ignore everything that's on the screen. This just basically means I've connected to my Linux machine. I'm just gonna go ahead and clear it, and now I'm gonna go over to my work environment, which is this new folder that I just created called Test New Ember. Or actually, I'm gonna rename this. Actually, I'm just gonna call it Lessons. So I have this new folder in here called Lessons, and I'll use that, to do anything that we're going to be doing for these lessons. So anyway, so we were discussing NPM. So let's navigate over to NPM's website, npm.js. And to understand exactly what's going on, it kind of takes at least understanding what Git is. Even if you're not familiar with how to use Git yet, you have to at least have a basic understanding of what Git is. So with any project that you build in NPM, it's going to have a Git repository behind it. So let's talk about what that means. So since we're going to be discussing Ember, let's look up the Ember package. Now there's a ton of packages called Ember. In particular, we're going to be working with Ember CLI. That is the official Ember application that we're going to be, which is what we use for the Ember framework that we're going to be working with. Now, on every NPM library that you find, regardless of what it is, whether it's a calculator, whether it's jQuery, whatever library, and we discussed this a little bit in the last lesson, but whatever library you're using, library or framework, it's going to be tied to a Git repository. And thank you for the follow, Cenobite Offsec. I appreciate that. So if you look at your down in the repository column here, when you're looking at your library from NPM, you're going to notice that it tells you the URL to the Git repository. Now, if it's an NPM, registered in NPM, it's got to be an open source public repository. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty positive that every single package released to NPM is open source. That's why it's available for anybody to pull and fork and do whatever they want to do with it, right? So if I click on the repository, this basically takes me to Ember CLI's GitHub page, and you guys may have seen this before in the past. Maybe now. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so everybody can see what I'm looking at. But essentially, this is basically all of the files that collectively creates the Ember CLI project. Now, this again is going to be the same for regardless of what library you're looking at. So, off the top of my head, I've never looked for a tic-tac-toe library before, right? But I'm sure one exists. So there you got tic-tac-toe board right there. Now, this does not mean that it's going to all be compatible with everything you do. No, because it is NPM, you can expect majority of these, or if all of these applications, to be JavaScript, because again, NPM is a node package manager. So for it to run a node, it's got to be JavaScript. Now I don't know anything at all about this app that I just clicked on. It was just a random search, but let's go ahead and look into it together, and we can kind of see what it means, right? So here you're going to get some information about it. I like going straight to the repository to get more information about it, because sometimes the released version on NPM is not going to be the most recent version that they had. So I'm going to go straight to their Git repository to look more into this project. So this project was created by this guy. His username is Choco Naira. And if we look at his README, he explains, so a tic-tac-toe board, NPM module, and TypeScript with built-in methods, and I don't know anything at all about this application. But here is his own documentation that the developer of this library created to explain how you would install the tic-tac-toe board, how you would import it, how you would use it, etc., etc. So if you're trying to code a tic-tac-toe game, you could save yourself a lot of time by using this guy's library, going through the documentation, and just using this library that they created to make your tic-tac-toe game. Or you could code your tic-tac-toe game from scratch and just not use any libraries, right? But the NPM is meant for people to be able to build on somebody else's project. Sometimes you're just using their library as a resource. Sometimes you're trying to do exactly what they've already done, and you're just going to change a couple of things. So you can use their package and then override the things that you want to change in your project. Now, here, like, these are all the Git files that make up his whole entire project. So we can actually go and click on his lib and look at his board.ts. So this is basically his class where all of his functions for the boards are essentially just JavaScript and code that he's already built. And if you want to pull this into your project, you would use npm, and I'll do it here as an example. I can literally just, so in my lessons, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to say tic-tac-toe, right? Tic-tac-toe. So this is going to be my new project. I'm going to go into that folder and I'm going to type node init. Node init initializes my application. I got an error. Let me see what's wrong here. Tic-tac-toe init. Can't find module Ember lessons. Tic-tac-toe init module not found. I don't think it's node init. It's npm init. My bad. It's npm init, not node init. So npm init will go ahead and create this package.json file for you. And here's, we talked about this in the last lesson, right? So you're specifying what your package name is going to be, what the version is, description, yada yada yada. So you're essentially creating your own npm package. Now we officially have an npm package called tic-tac-toe. If you want to publish this to npm, I'm not going to go over how to do that, but you can look it up. It'll tell you what commands you need to write to publish your package to npm, so it becomes a publicly available package, just like this tic-tac-toe board that this guy created. But for this package, I want to include his work into my work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and follow his documentation here. But generally, it's always going to be the same command, regardless of what package you're looking at. It's going to be npm install, the name of the npm package, and then you can do save or save dev. There is a difference, and we'll go into what the difference is in the future when we're working with Ember. We're not going to deal with this right now, but let's go ahead and just run this command, npm install tic-tac-toe board save. And this is going to automatically pull all of these files that he has on his Git repository, and it's going, I'll show you exactly what it does. So it basically pulls his project, which is, I kind of went back on it here. So it pulls this project, his package.json project, into my node modules, and it installs his tic-tac-toe project as a module of my project. So now if we look at our package.json file, now that we've done our npm install, we see that here, dependencies, tic-tac-toe board version 1.2.2. Now, there is, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail into how the versioning system works. We'll get into that down the road because I don't want to make things extra confusing. But essentially, you can either make it so it's pulling the exact version, or you can, like, what this means is that it'll pull this version and any minor version above this. So like if the package is 1.2.5, if there's one available that's 1.2.5, it'll go ahead and pull that instead of 1.2.2, but it won't pull anything older than 1.2.2, if that makes sense, right? So anyway, so moving on. So now I've installed his project into my project, and if I navigate through my files, and I know that, you know, some people watching may not have experience navigating things on a terminal or on a console, so essentially all I'm doing is opening the folders, right? And I'm actually going to download this stuff over here so you can see it on Windows as well, so people are familiar with seeing the files in a Windows setup, and we'll do that. But basically, this node modules is a folder. If I go into node modules, we have all of these different node modules that come in by default with npm. But one of the ones that matter here is the tic-tac-toe. I gotta scroll down to find it. There it is, tic-tac-toe board. So that is his project. So if I go into tic-tac-toe board, then there it is. This is basically his project. And if you look at this package.json file, which is his package.json file, so tic-tac-toe board, blah, 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 this is basically his whole project, right? So we can actually find this file right here, because that is his project. Anyway, so here's the interesting thing about npm, and I think that you guys are starting to hopefully notice this pattern with anything you're doing in programming in general, not just JavaScript, but his project could also have other dependencies. So the same way that you can create your own npm project with some dependencies, and by dependency I mean like whatever project you include in your project, those projects obviously have their own dependencies, which could have their own dependencies, and so on and so forth. So like this huge chain of dependencies. That is why npm is so powerful. It kind of handles all of that for you, so you can just focus on the app that you're building. And even if you want to use somebody else's app, npm will automatically deal with those dependencies. So if they decide that they make an update to their version, to their library that's going to change one of their dependencies, once you run your npm install and it updates the version of whatever dependency you're using, all the changes that they made are going to be in your app as well. Sometimes this could lead to issues, as you can imagine. Maybe you're using a dependency and you require something to work the way it was originally coded, and then there's been a change in how they did something in a newer version that could break your application, because your application is not going to work. So when something like this happens, you have two choices. Either A, you're going to make changes to your application to adjust it for whatever change was made with the dependency. But say it's like a lot of work and you really don't feel like doing that, you can just go into your package.json, and well, this is not the right one. Let's go back to our directory here. So you can go into your package.json and you can basically force the version to be the original version that you got, or whatever version is the latest version that you know works with everything that you've built with. But you do that by removing that that sign right there and just specifying that specific version directly, and it'll go and make sure that it's always using that version instead. I know that this can be very confusing, so I will open it up for questions right now if there are any. Does anybody have any questions? Bress is here. Hi, Bress.
What's good?
Hi, Brass. Could that be compared to like if you built a mod off of a game and then the game updates, you then have to like go back in and either fix it, or then if you want to run the mod, you can only run a certain version of the game?
So you're okay. So you're comparing it to like you have. Let me just make sure I understand. So you're comparing like you have a game.
You modded an add-on in I'm gonna say Sims again, but like if you have like the add-ons that use the mod Sims that add certain things,
right?
And then the game updates, you always have to download the updated version of the mod.
Right, because
what exactly you do on Sims.
Yeah, like so, like if the new version of the game, in this case Sims, breaks the original mod and the mod is no longer compatible, then you have to wait for the mod to update. Now, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the same thing, because in this scenario you have a game that's independent of the mod. The mod is dependent on the game. The game's independent of the mod. So from the mod's perspective, I guess technically the game is a dependency, right? And if you can still run the older version of the game before the updates, the mod would still work, right? But in order for the mod to work with the new version, they have to release a new version of the mod that works for the game. So this is like one of the reasons why in the corporate industry, For those who are not familiar at all how development works in a corporate industry, if you are, say you create, let's just give like an example off the top. Okay, so like I'll give a simple example with like how, I'm not going to get into detail about the company that I work for, but basically I work with a quizzing platform for medical students, right? So this is something that was built a long time ago, and we have a ton of customers that use our quizzing platform to basically test themselves before taking their actual tests that they need, to graduate and get their degrees or whatever. They use our quizzing platform to kind of test their own skills and practice all their knowledge, right? Now, this is a simple application. If you think about it, like if you really think about it, you could apply that to anything. This doesn't have to be just for medical students. You can create a quizzing platform project that's for, I don't know, maybe real estate, right? Because real estate goes through training. Maybe you want to do it for literally anything, right? Anything in this world where you have to pass some kind of test. So Brass is a plumber. If you want to get your plumber's license, there's some test that you have to pass, right? So say you decide you want to start a company, like a technical company that creates an application that's going to basically help plumbers study for this test and know everything they need to do for this test. So this is essentially my day job, with the only difference being is what I work on specifically in the team that I work for, it's for medical students, but this could be for anything. Technically, it's just an application. So you have your sources. So say that the source of information, like so where the content for your application comes from, say that that's managed by a third-party app. Maybe it's an app that all they do is just release books online, and it's just content, and you're including their library into your project because you need that content to come in, so you can provide that content to your students for them to read up on before they can answer these questions that you generate in your application. So in this example, if the content library changes in updates, you got to make sure you stay up to date with their updates, and you're constantly updating your app. Likewise, now your app is going to have all kinds of things. If it's a quizzing platform, it's going to be, maybe it's multiple choice questions. So you're going to have like this whole quizzing system that you got to go through and provide these questions to your customers or students, where you're going to have to like have them select a multiple choice question. You have to have some kind of system to determine if the question is correct. Or I'm not going to get into the inner workings of how to build a quizzing platform, right? But in the end of the day, you have an application that needs to be maintained. So you basically, if it's something successful and you're able to sell it, either sell it to customers, or a big plumbing company decides to buy your application and slap their name on it, you're still probably managing the team that's working on this application. So this application's got to stay up to date, right? It's got to always be compatible with every mobile device. When new mobile devices come out, new screens come out, you got to make sure that it's all good there. You got to make sure, so you can imagine, if you could really sit there and think about all the different things that are constantly changing and improving that relate to what you're doing, you basically want to have a team that's always changing. And then when it comes to the topic itself, the same thing in the medical industry, there's always new breakthroughs and new discoveries and new researches being published as we learn more and more about the science of how our bodies work, right? It's the same thing with any industry, really. So even in plumbing, with the plumbing example, there's always new heating systems and new whatever, right? So the knowledge is always changing. So wherever's providing the content, whether your company provides the content or not, that needs to change. Everything needs to change. So in the corporate world, you'll have, for the most part, some kind of ticketing system. So I could kind of show if it's working. Let's see. It might not be up right now because I haven't touched this in a while. If this doesn't load, then we're not gonna have any visual aids here. Okay, it does work. Let's see if my thing's gonna work. So this is the Dynamic D internal ticketing systems for Dynamic D projects, and it doesn't always have to be Jira. Of course, there are tons of ticketing systems out there, but your company may choose to manage. So like a company can have a bunch of different projects. So ABOS, right, is a project that we discussed that we may be working on collectively here in the future. This is like running super slow right now, but basically you create tickets that is just work items describing the specific work that needs to be done. Somebody in the team will pick up that work. They'll go ahead and make the changes to the application that they need to make. They submit that as a Git pull request. But basically what that means in pull requests, and I can't show an example here because this is this guy's application and there's no public pull requests here. But basically, whatever you changed in the code, a pull request will show you, and this is why Git is so powerful and so important. It'll show you only the things that are different. So then somebody who's like more senior level, like in Dynamicd example, if you guys submit like a code change to a Dynamicd project, I'll be looking at your change and will either be approving that change or declining that change or requesting changes to your changes, if you know, and it kind of goes in that back and forth until it's finally ready to be merged in. And then all those changes, once it's all ready to go, we publish that as a new version of our application. So if there's a different application using our application as a dependency, you know, so this is when, you know, if you're making a major change to your application that will definitely break any implementation of somebody who's using it, right? So if your API has changed, and I hope you guys know what that means when I say if your API has changed. If not, you know, it'll make sense of it eventually. We'll cover that in the future. But that's when you will, instead of just updating a minor version, you're updating a major version, right? So you're going from like version 1 to version 2 instead of version 1 to version 1.1 or 1.0.1, because your changes will affect anything that's using your application now. So in this case, now whatever's using your application, now they okay, so if we want to use version 2, we have to go through their documentation and look at everything that changed from version 1 to version 2. So I have to see all the changes that we need to make to our application to use that application. Hope that makes sense. It's a lot of, you know, but I just wanted to kind of explain more of like what the chain system with NPM is and why this becomes so useful. Because now if you really think about it, any project that you want to start with NPM, and I am like, the sky is really the limit. If you just go anything that you can think of application wise, we were just talking about quizzing platform, right? So I'm just going to type quizzing. There's okay, this is not what I had in mind. So let's quiz platform. Let's see if there's anything like that. All right, so NGX quiz API, server side for NGX quiz, open source quiz platform. So there are quiz public facing quiz platforms out there, right? And then like in quizzing is just an example. Whatever application you're trying to build, somebody's already done some work, and of course it doesn't mean that it's going to be public just because somebody did it, but the odds of finding something similar to what you're trying to do that's already available in NPM is very high because of how long it's been around and how long NPM has been a thing. It's been probably over a decade and a half at this point, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not going to fact check that, but from my experience, I believe that that's about correct. So, you know, when you're thinking of building out a whole technology project using JavaScript, NPM becomes your best friend because you can either A, utilize the work that somebody else has done and build on top of what they've done, or you can just navigate that to look at how has other JavaScript developers approached these problems. You may look at their package and not like how they solve certain problems at all and decide, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself. You know, so maybe you just look at it as just a reference and that's it and nothing else, right? But since we're here in the learning, we're going to go ahead and jump into what Ember means. So Ember, just like all these different NPM projects, is basically a framework for web development. It's a framework for building applications, building websites, etc. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and remove this tic-tac-toe folder from here, and we're going to talk a little about Ember. So if you are following this example, so the first thing you're going to have to do to get Ember up and running is you got to install the Ember package to your node installation. So you would do that by doing an npm install, and then you would do -g for global, and you would type Ember CLI. Now this would install the most recent version. I'll just go ahead and run it. This is going to install the most recent version of Ember CLI globally to my npm. So the globally is what this G means here, and this is an important distinction to understand. So when I'm installing something globally, I'm installing something to my global node installation. I'm not necessarily putting it in a specific project, and not every single project is going to have like, it's not going to be like Ember CLI. If you see anything -CLI, it'll work this way where you can install it globally and it just becomes something that you can then use to run more commands, and Ember is one of those examples. CLI stands for command line interface, by the way. So anything command line, like like your Windows command prompt or what we're looking at right now, is what that would be for. So anyway, so now I've installed Ember CLI, now I can use the Ember command, and I'm gonna here start and do Ember V. So Ember-V is going to give me the Ember version, which is version 3.27. That's the most recent Ember CLI version available, and it's using our LTS node, and the operating system that I am on right now is Linux x64. In your case, it's probably going to say Windows, either 64 or 32-bit, whatever version you're using. If you're on Mac, it should say, I'm not sure actually what it will say on Mac. OS X, I believe, something. OS X, whatever version your operating system is for Mac. But anyway, so let's go ahead. I'm going to actually open a tutorial that you should open if you're going to start a brand new Ember application, right? And let's go ahead and look for Ember new app tutorial. And we're going to go for the official Ember guides. It's right here, creating your app. And we're literally going to just go through and follow this app together because it's very straightforward. I'm going to skip the blurbs because I've already been through this before, but I do recommend that you guys read all of this when you're setting it up, because this is going to explain things that I may miss here, but I'll try my best to kind of explain it. So Ember new, Super Rentals. Super Rentals is the name of their dummy application. We're going to call it, I don't know what we're going to call it. We're just going to call it lesson app. There, so lesson app. Bam. Ember new lesson app. So we did this in the end of our last lesson. We created a test application just so I could show you guys what it meant. But today we're going to do it again, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into explaining the whole structure and what everything means. So here their guide is already having a read up on the structure. So please do read it, because anything that I miss, you'll be able to get it from there. I'm only going to explain as I go along the things that I feel are important to understand off the top of my head. So I definitely may miss some things, but the good news is on this web page here, it's all there. Now, one thing already off the top of my head that I just realized here it says version 2.14.0 tutorial. So that's wrong. You want to definitely make sure that you are using the most, whatever version you're installing Ember with. I'm just gonna have to wait for this to finish because I don't remember what the version was anymore. If it was the most recent one, you should be able to scroll all the way up to the top. I believe it was 3.26, and make sure that you're reading the guide. Again, versions matter, right? Because these things change. So like here, it's giving me a warning saying, "Old guides, you are viewing the guides for Ember 2.14.0. View blah blah blah." So I can literally just click here. I ignore the warning, right? But anyway, so it's the same thing that they do here. They just build Ember Super Rental. Now this guide is set up a little bit differently. Welcome to just 1 second. About us, where would you stay? Okay, so here it kind of give you an overview of what the application is gonna look like, I guess, when you're done. Their dummy application. If you want to do their dummy application, that's fine. We're not gonna actually build anything in this example. We're just gonna basically launch a vanilla app and then just kind of go through the structure for it. But anyway, so here I say, okay, let's dive right in. Orientation. Okay, so this is, we already did this, right? We installed Ember globally. We checked the version. So this, the -v command that I wrote is basically the shortcut for the same thing, -- version. And then Ember new Super Rental. So we're in this step right here, right? It's installing app. It's doing all this stuff here. And then here it gives you an explanation of like the full structure of the app. So our app is done, right? It's done installing. So we're gonna go ahead and just cd into lesson app, which is the folder that we just created. And when we go in there, so these are all the files. So they're kind of going over all these files and describing, like, I don't know if it describes everything that it means, I don't remember. But then it tells you how to run your application, which is what I'm going to do. You could do Ember server like they do in their example, or you could just say Ember S for short and just run that. By default, it'll run on this 4200 port. You know, so unless you have advanced port configuration on your machine, I would just recommend using the default port. Doesn't really matter there too much. So this is going to take a little bit to build, but it's building our app based on all the original files that it comes with. So I haven't changed a thing. So while that's building, I'm going to go ahead and using NetBeans. So for those using NetBeans, you might want to pay attention to this example as well. If you're doing this locally in your machine, you don't have to worry about this because it's already on your computer. So all you have to do is just, you know, create a project and navigate to that project. Now for me, because this is on my server, I have to download all these files, right? So I created this new test Ember here. I'm going to rename this to lesson app, which is the lesson app that we're working on right now. And now I'm going to come here on NetBeans. I'm going to say new project, and I'm going to stick to just PHP with existing resources. You could do HTML, JavaScript, etc. It doesn't really make a difference unless you want the code hints. I don't like the code hints, so I use PHP on purpose because I know it's not a PHP app. I don't really want NetBeans trying to work out my project for me. That's just me. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and navigate over to where that folder is on my computer. I created it here, so it's going to be lesson app, okay, and then I'm just going to hit next. Now, because I have this set up on a remote server, I'm going to change this here where it says local website. I'm going to change it to remote website, and I'm going to basically, like, so I already have configured my connections for my server here. So in this case, I already have my SD dev. You guys will have a setup like this to connect to our student server soon. I haven't set up that up yet, you know, but I will be setting up within the next 2 to 3 lessons, you know, so you guys can actually have access to the server and be able to do stuff on the server, which will save you a lot of time and space on your machine. And then, so this is where you change the upload directory. So this is important because this is basically where it's going to store the files on the server. Now, in my case, I actually have it here, mstumpyc, Ember, lessons, lesson app. So I need to make sure that I change that to be on Ember, lessons, lesson dash app. So that's where my thing is. I'm going to change the uploaded files on save. So that means that every time I save a file on NetBeans, it's going to automatically upload the file, and I'm going to hit finish. Now, if you're using NetBeans for an NPM project, the next couple of steps that I'm going to go over here are actually very, very important to, you know, so this is a pretty important part if you are connecting to, or even if you're not connecting to a server. If you're working with an Ember application or an Angular framework or whatever, any NPM application really, you want to create you're gonna already have the node modules folder, but since I don't have the files yet and I haven't downloaded my application yet, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm gonna call it node_modules. Then I'm gonna also create another folder, and I'm gonna call it TMP, and I'll explain why I'm doing this in a second. So now I'm going to right click on my app, and I'm gonna go to properties, and I'm gonna go down to ignored folders, and I'm gonna add these 2 folders that I just created, which is node modules. I wrote that wrong. Let me fix that. It's node modules like that, and open, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the TMP folder. TMP, open, okay, right? So now what this has done, notice that they kind of disappeared. They are there, so if I come here and navigate to that on Windows, those 2 folders are there. Node modules and TMP, they're both there. And NB project is like the default NetBeans project folder that doesn't show up here, so I don't have to worry about it. But now when I download my project, right, I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna download my project. I'm just gonna select all and just download the whole Ember vanilla project the same way that Ember set it up on my server. So these are all my project files now on NetBeans. Resave that. I'm just going to put no for this. It doesn't matter. And now I have my whole project. Now, if I come here, I'm going to close this real quick, and I'm going to... We do have this node modules folder, and we do have this TMP folder. So TMP folder is an Ember thing. Ember likes to put all the temporary files in this TMP directory when your project is running, right? It clears it every now and then, but when your project is running, which we just closed it, so it's not running, you'll have some files in the TMP directory. So the reason why I ignore that folder is because I don't want to accidentally download temporary files to my computer. And then the reason why I got rid of the node modules folder is because, so this is all of those dependencies that we talked about. And there's going to be a ton of them, right? So we just kind of like spent, I think, a good 20 plus minutes of this lesson talking about dependency chains. So Ember is going to have a massive, massive, massive list of dependency chains. Like, you can really go down the rabbit hole here if you start trying to figure out what the NPM library looks like. But there's this pretty cool illustration here that let me see if I can find it. I saw this the other day. NPM dependency tree viewer visual. Okay, yeah, I think this is it. So just so you can have an idea, a visual idea, right? So the package is Ember CLI. So if I go and I pick Ember CLI, this is basically a visual representation of how many different sub-projects, you can kind of see it there, how many different sub-projects are involved in this one project. You know, so it's just all dependencies of dependencies, which are dependencies of dependencies, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of gives you an idea and puts into perspective how powerful NPM can be, and how we are into open source development these days here in 2021, of how much we kind of rely on open libraries and other people's work to kind of save ourselves a ton of time. Because at the end of the day, like, you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time you build a project, right? You want to be able to utilize the resources that you do have for the most part. So this is what Ember CLI is dependent upon. A lot of these are their own projects. Other projects are not their own project, but there's just a whole lot going on there, right? There are tons, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of dependencies here in the end of the day. But you don't have to. The good thing about it, though, and the cool thing about it, is that you don't have to worry about it. You don't, like, unless you're hacking Ember and you're very, very like advanced development where you really need to like fork Ember and change the way that Ember fundamentally works, which is not something that even I ever attempted to do because I don't see the point. You're not gonna have to worry about what all these dependencies that Ember is using. All you need to remember is that as long as you are working on with the Ember version, right? So as long as you're developing for a specific Ember version, so current version and above, is you don't have to worry about those dependencies. Everything is going to work because Node Package Manager kind of keeps that database of the correct versions of all these dependencies for you. But anyway, so let's go back to where we are now, right? So these are all our vanilla project files. I'm going to get into explaining how this all works. So let me close this because this doesn't matter. So it all starts from the HTML. So let's kind of go back to what we know about building a simple HTML CSS app, right? So from the very beginning of these lessons that we've done here, we've kind of gone over and we discussed, you know, just the basic of laying out an HTML page, saving it on your computer, testing it out. So with this Ember app, if you open your app folder and open your index.html file, you're gonna see your basic HTML. So this is essentially what your app is. It's just a simple app, right? But now Ember uses this thing called handlebars, and we're probably not gonna have time to get into the handlebars today, but we will cover that in the next lesson, as we will continue exploring Ember in the next lesson, right? But basically here it says content for head. So this will dynamically pull every content that's supposed to be in your header from your application and kind of plug it in where this goes. You're not actually encouraged to change anything in your index HTML. You're supposed to like add stuff to it. So if you want to add a description, like, this is a test app. So this is really more for search engine optimization, which just, shows, like, basically means how your website gets ranked and found through a search engine bots such as Google, or I don't even know if I could say Yahoo. Does Yahoo still exist? Yahoo.com. Whoops, that's not how you type it though. Yahoo is Yahoo still a search engine? It still is a search engine. Okay, so Yahoo, Google, Bing, etc. Right? So all these meta keywords. We haven't talked a lot about search engine optimization in our lessons, and we won't, because that's honestly an industry of its own. It's related more to marketing than web development. So we're not going to go over it. We're going to focus more on development. If you guys are interested in looking up how to optimize a website for search engine optimization, just look it up. There are tons of free lessons on that available online. And then moving on. So here you notice that this is linking to vendor.css. So this is where we can kind of start talking a little bit about how Ember works, right? In the end, your application will point to vendor.css. But notice that you don't actually have a vendor.css file anywhere. Like if you look anywhere on this app, there's no such thing as a vendor.css. What you do have though is an app.css. And basically everything that you do in your app.css will be built as vendor.css when your app is built and when it's running. And I'll go ahead and do like a quick example of that, right? I don't want to like forget anything. So let's just go ahead and run this app real quick. It's going to do Ember S again. It's going to build. So this is where Ember takes all of these files in your app folder, and not just your app folder, but all your configuration files, etc. And it's going to automatically build this app here for you. And now we can access the app on this server. It's literally running a web server on your computer, a temporary one, that you can use to access it. Now, again, because my scenario is a little bit different with my setup, for you, if you just copy and paste that into your browser like that and just run localhost 4200, you should access your site. Now, localhost points to the computer, that your own computer. In my case, I'm not running this from my computer. I'm running this from my server. So I have to type in the IP, my local IP to my server, which is this one. And now I access my app, and there it is. And we kind of, again, went over this in the ending of our last session. But this is the vanilla out-of-the-box Ember application. But we're going to kind of review and talk about what is making this happen very quickly, like using NPM. And that's how we're going to end our lesson today. And then on our next lesson, we're going to continue exploring Ember a little bit more, because I've just noticed we're getting close to the top of the hour there. But we're going to continue finalizing this lesson as talking more about dependencies and how dependencies work, but through this Ember example, right? So to kind of finish on the point that I made last time, where all your styles end up going into Ember, vendor.css. If you look at any of your styles here, and I'll just use the inspector, you notice that right here, right, this vendor.css file is created, and if you click on it, you have this assets less than dash app.css, because it's, and here's your vendor.css file that has all of the styles that are basically making your web page. But this is all generated for Ember. When you build your application, it gets all generated as vendor.css. So in other words, you are not really, don't touch this unless you know what you're doing and you're going to be changing something very specific. Do not touch the configuration for your index.html file. Only touch this if you want to change your title and if you want to add the search engine optimization stuff to your file. Otherwise, you're leaving all of this alone. This vendor.js here, lesson.app, but this is the HTML structure that that Ember uses to basically formulate your whole entire app from top to bottom, right? And we're going to get into more detail about all of that as we go along with these Ember lessons. But for now, let's talk about like where is this shit coming from. Like it says, congratulations, you made it, blah 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 blah, right? So in Ember, the very first template that's going to load on top of everything, regardless of what subroute you're in, it's always going to be the template of application.hbs. And HBS is, think about it as an HTML file, but HBS means for handlebar. It stands for handlebars, and it's a handlebars file. And we're going to get into that more, but basically it is essentially just HTML code. I know that none of this looks like HTML code, but that's because there's really nothing happening here. So here you have a helper for your page title. So if I change this to be, potatoes, and I save, my app, this is going to detect the change that you made to the file automatically, and it's going to reload your app. So now if I go here, notice that my title here changed to potatoes. So you don't even have to go and change that on your HTML file, on their index.html file, because it's going to be controlled in your application. So in your application HBS, you have this helper here, page title potatoes. And then this is an HBS comment. If you could recall in previous lessons, I talked about how in both JavaScript and CSS you can comment stuff, right? So this is how you would comment something in CSS. We talked about how you would comment in HTML. So in an HBS file, this is how you would comment. Like it would be squiggly, squiggly, exclamation, dash, dash, and then you can literally write whatever you want in there because it's just a comment, and then you close it with dash, dash, close, close, curly bracket. It's always double curly bracket for handlebars. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's always double curly. So if you're doing single curly, you're going to have issues. I'm going to get rid of these comments just to kind of simplify things, right? But the original comment is telling you the following component displays Ember's default Ember message. So this welcome page is a component, and we're going to finalize by kind of going into and digging into that a little bit. And then here it just says feel free to remove this, because this is essentially your page. You can remove it and do whatever you want. So and then this outlet is like, we're going to get in. I'm going to remove it for now, but we're going to get into this in the future, why that outlet is there and what it does. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So all we have here so far is just page title, potatoes, welcome page. So I'm going to save. We haven't changed anything. We just removed a couple of comments, right? And there's your welcome page. Now, what happens if I remove this welcome page and I say hello world? So now you've just built your vanilla blank hello world application, where the only thing that you have there is hello world. So what happened to everything that was there right before? So all of that comes from this welcome page, and this welcome page is what we call in Ember a component. It pulls a component in and just kind of slaps all the code for your HTML code and all the JavaScript that's associated with it, just puts it right here in your HTML. So where do we find this, right? This is not in our application anywhere. You can go to your templates, you go to your components. We don't have any components. I haven't done anything to this application. So this welcome page here actually comes from your package.json. This is actually a whole other Ember project that's built to literally only provide that welcome page. And if you look here, it's called Ember welcome page. This is an NPM dependency. So we're gonna go look at it so we can see what it does. So if you want to dig through the code of a dependency, you can do that. We can go and look up Ember welcome page in NPM. This is what it is. This is the repository for it, right? And if we go ahead and click on add, and now we're gonna, in the future, we'll talk about how add-on structures work, but Ember add-on, so this is where it is, and now you have this components folder. And then if you click on this components folder, you have your JavaScript for your welcome page, right? And then if you go down and look at templates components, this is where you have your HBS file for your welcome page. So if you click on this, this is where you see all of this code. It says congratulations, you made it, blah 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 blah. And if you look at this, this is basically all the code that generates what you see here when you are including that component. So that component comes from this welcome page package, and it has all of that there. Now in Ember, you can override a component if you want to. and it'll be the last thing I'll do here on this lesson. So I'm gonna close this out, and we're gonna talk a lot more about how to generate different parts of an Ember application. But I'm gonna type Ember G component, and I'm gonna say welcome dash page. Make sure that's what it is. Welcome dash page. Yep. So we're gonna create a new component called welcome page, right? So this is in our application. And notice that it basically created this template, this component for me, a template file, and it's telling me that if I want to create a JavaScript, I have to run a different command. We're not going to do any JavaScript here, so we're not going to touch it. We're just going to go ahead and modify that file. So now if I go on my NetBeans and I download the whole app again, or I know what changed, right? I'm not going to download the whole app. I'm just going to download the components folder again, because that's the only thing that's changed. So I'm going to go ahead and download the whole components folder. That's going to give me our new welcome page. And here I'm just going to say, in this welcome page, I'm going to say tra la 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 la, save. And I'm going to run this application again. And what should happen now, once this rebuilds, I have to rebuild it manually because I closed it. So once we rebuild this page now with a different component called welcome page, and this is just kind of like a very quick explanation of how Ember components work in general. And we're going to let this build out. It's going to take a little bit. And now we're going to refresh. And there's nothing there. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I know why there's nothing there. But, you know, notice that that welcome page is gone, right? Like that original welcome page is gone. And the only thing that I did was created this new component called welcome page, right? So this to kind of like finalize this lesson by describing how Ember add-ons work. Basically, when you are using an Ember add-on in your application, it's going to take everything on the add-on directory and it's going to override, or not going to override, but it's going to include all of these things into your application. So it's kind of like if this welcome page.hbs was in my components folder instead, even though it's not. We're just including it as an npm dependency, right? But it'll be there, and that's why you can access it like this. And I know this is a little rushed and confusing right now, but it'll make more sense. Now, the reason why I broke it is because I made a new component with the same name. So now the component that sits and lives in my application is going to override the welcome page component that my dependency is using. So say, for instance, you're using an add-on that has like 20 different components, but you only want to change one of them. You can literally create a component on your end that has the same name as the one you want to change. You can copy the code from their component and paste it into yours and then change whatever you want to change. If it's JavaScript you're trying to change, there are better ways of doing that where you don't actually have to copy the code, but we're going to go into that in the future. We're not going to talk about that right now. But if I were to go ahead and delete my welcome page component now because I don't want it anymore, I want to use the original one. Now my application, when it builds, and I might actually have to, now my application, when it builds, will use the welcome page that's coming from the add-on. And that's basically how you reference components in Ember, just like this, angle bracket syntax. In HTML, this looks like an element, and this might be confusing, right? Because it is basically just an element, but Ember will do the work to match the name of your element to a component. Like, you can still come in here and say, and type regular HTML code. I can say href google.com, www.google.com, and I can say take me to Google, and I'm gonna, just for the sake of simplicity, remove this component again. I'm just gonna save this, and it's going to rebuild, and there's your regular HTML, take me to Google. If we look at the source, it's just that regular HTML, and in your body is where it gets generated, right, by Ember. But so you would have to like come back and look at it on your inspector so you can actually see what's going on. But there it is, your href right there, take me to Google. You click on it, we made it so it takes you to Google, and that's it. So this is basically the beginnings of an Ember application. I know that this specific lesson was more about npm dependencies, less about Ember, but we kind of finalized it on Ember and like looking at how you pull that welcome page from an npm, like something as simple as just a little display that gives you like a little introduction to Ember there. And we're gonna dig a little bit deeper on the next lesson. We're gonna talk about components, controller. We're gonna actually go through all these folders and talk about what each things mean and how to use them, where and when you would use them, why you would use them, and that will give you a better understanding of the structure of an Ember application and why, like, you know, so all that work done for you allows you to focus on just what you're trying to build. And you can use what this Ember blueprint, if you will, to develop your project. And with the Ember structure, I can say from experience that you can build just about any. I mean, you can say that for any framework, honestly, but you can build whatever it is you're trying to build. Any application at all, whether it's a game, whether it's a phone app, whether it's a mobile app. Technically, you can do it with Ember. We're not going to get into much detail about that right now, but you could technically build a mobile application using Ember. You know, and the sky's the limit, really, when you have the power of, you know, something like npm being able to reuse work that's already done. You don't have to always start from scratch when you're trying to build a project, regardless of what that project is, regardless of what it means to whatever industry your project is gonna go for. Like if this is like something that you're gonna sell to a customer or customers or whatever, again, sky's the limit. But anyway, we're gonna wrap it up over here. But before wrapping it up, I will open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions at all about what we've gone over before we wrap it up?
Nah, fam.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so we'll wrap it up over here. Like, I know that this doesn't leave us with a whole lot to practice on, but as far as practice suggestions, which I like to end on, I would say it's really more about environment setup. Like, try to get like a local node setup going. Try to actually basically just get a vanilla app, a vanilla Ember app running, because if you can get to that point on your own between now and the next lesson, then on the next lesson you'll kind of be able to hit the ground running with whatever we decide to do with Ember from that point on. And for Nora specifically, you know, we will be actually doing this for URLC. I'm not gonna show any of that stuff on the stream right now, but we're gonna be doing that for the URLC tickets that we're gonna be setting up. So if you want to try to get that set up, that would be great. But that's it. I'll go ahead and wrap it up here, going offline. Thank you guys very much for the time. And this was lesson 10. That's a cheat there. All right. Have a good one, everybody.